recently rode at the Rapha Cannock Chase Prestige. The Prestige events are best thought as kind of like a long distance cyclocross race. The Prestige is a team event and we had 4 people representing from BikeRadar. The entire event was kind of characterised by this super wet, dreek weather, which kept us definitely on our toes for the whole day. The ride also presented a host of firsts for me, being the first time I've ever ridden a bang-up-to-date modern cyclocross bike for any length of time. The bike in question was an Engineered Bicycles Zondag. It's worth pointing out as well that the route wasn't actually marked out. We were given a GPX file which was kind of a suggested route, and the important thing was that we just went to each of these checkpoints, got a stamp, and kind of passed on. You know, the ride apart from these checkpoints was completely unsupported, so route finding on occasion, particularly going through the kind of really complicated fire road sections, you know, we took a couple wrong turns. For the most part, it was a pretty painless experience. And as well as a mix of kind of farm tracks and really broken up country roads, there's also loads of sections of really pretty technical single track, alongside some perilously slippy sections alongside canals. One of the things that did strike me about the build of the bike as it was supplied to me was the 31mm Vittoria tyres. 31mm is pretty skinny even by cyclocross racing standards. You're normally seeing like 33mm tyres in UCI races. There were some sections in particular where we were riding along the side of a canal along perilously skinny, super slidey single track. And when you're kind of skittering about next to some water, it would have been good to get as much traction as possible. While I was able to run lower pressures with the tubeless setup, it would have been nice to see some slightly wider tyres just to improve the comfort and traction throughout the day. As a start, this was the first time I've ever ridden a cyclocross bike set up tubeless, and it has to be said, I left the whole experience feeling pretty impressed. Not only was I able to run far lower pressures than I would have if I was running tubes, but I suffered no flats, the same of which can't be said for poor Josh, who was running retrograde tubes in his wheels. 4 flats. Fun. I did manage to burp the tyres on one occasion, but to be honest, I think that was more of a result of me just being an idiot, getting a bit rowdy on a descent. For the most part, they gave me absolutely no issues, and I really was very impressed with how they performed. The geometry numbers of the Zondag are undoubtedly racy. You know, it's got a pretty high bottom bracket, it's got pretty steep angles, but this really suited my kind of riding style. I really like a long and low bike, and it just suits me very well. Interestingly, this bike was actually a 56cm, and I personally prefer normally riding a 58, but as I was looking for that kind of more aggressive position, the 56 allowed me to do that quite easily. I feel that some alloy bikes have a reputation for being kind of harsh and quite stiff in the ride, and this is a bit of a hangover from some truly stiff bikes in the 90s. And while you can make an alloy bike very stiff and unforgiving if you want, the Zondag did not strike me as overly harsh. The Scandium frame is definitely sure-footed. I've no doubt about that. You know, it's very confident. It doesn't feel wallowy, but compared to steel or carbon cross bikes I've ridden, it still felt very comfortable. Similar to the tyres where I've ridden tubeless setups plenty on mountain bikes, I've also used one-by drivetrains on mountain bikes for a very long time. This was actually my first time on a cross bike with a one-by drivetrain, and it has to be said, I really liked it. I liked how unfussy it was, I liked how simple it was, I liked how quiet it was. But having said that, if the loop had been any longer, I probably would have wanted a slightly bigger ranged cassette than the 1130 which was supplied. Because although I don't mind hoofing it up a hill occasionally, I would have liked something a bit easier to spin up if the loop had been any longer. I could definitely see the appeal of electronic shifting though for long distance rides like that, because towards the end of the ride, the combination of the mud and the grit just made my shifting terrible. It was no fault of the drivetrain itself, it definitely is just a reflection of how poor the conditions were on the day. As you'd expect of a modern cross bike, the Zondag comes with disc brakes, and Cannock Chase is notorious as a pad eater. The sandy conditions mixed in with kind of wet weather just eats pads alive. And myself and pretty much every rider I spoke to after the race went through an entire set of pads in the day. The alloy frame was matched with a pretty burly carbon through-axle fork up front, and although the bike was quick release at the rear, Engineered were keen to point out that newer versions of the bike do actually come with a through-axle at the back as well. The build was topped off with an exceedingly handsome stem and top cap, which were painted to match the kind of cool pearlescent finish, and it garnered so much interest throughout the day. The whole day was kind of characterized by just appalling weather. We had some seriously heavy rain, which just meant the ground was completely sodden the entire day. And it meant that these kind of sandy sections, you were really looking for traction where there probably wasn't any for the most part. Likewise, when we were kind of going along farm roads, it was really broken up ground. We had massive puddles just hiding beneath, and you'd all of a sudden find yourself kind of knee deep in this kind of horrible mix of clay and sandy water, and it really took its toll on the bikes, but more to the point, I was freezing cold for pretty much the entire day. And as we reached the kind of 80-kilometer mark, I was really struggling to pull the last of what I could out of the tank. Every kind of like 20 kilometers or so, there was a little food van that we could kind of go to, get a little feed, get some warm coffee, very Rapha. It was a very enjoyable experience and kind of kept you going throughout the day knowing that you had something coming soon, rather than just suffering in the misty cold for the entire day. One of the stipulations of the event was that we had to finish as a team, and the 4 of us crossed the line after about 4 hours, and we were rewarded with pizza and beer, and we were very happy to say that we won the social media prize for the day. We got some very nice socks. Compared to other bikes I've ridden before, this definitely was a slightly racier cyclocross bike, and it has to be said, with that more aggressive fit, for 80 kilometers it was okay. If I'd done anything longer, I probably would have erred for a slightly more relaxed fit, maybe gone for a slightly bigger bike, and I definitely would have wanted to go for some slightly wider tyres, just to improve the comfort and stop fatigue a little bit after the course of such a long ride. But overall, I did leave feeling really impressed with the Zondag, and it has to be said, I definitely would be considering a racy cyclocross bike in the future.